coming up on the final album now. We've got Blur and their album Park Life. In the opening montage, you heard Girls and Boys, and now you're going to hear End of a Century. Okay, Matt, what are the stats?
Park Life by Blur comes in at number 41 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 10 in 1994, number 210 of all time. It is Blur's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It also made Rolling Stone's list, coming in number 438, and Blur is ranked number 91 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
All right, so this album came out April 25th, 1994. Blur formed in London in 1988 when Alex James, the bassist, joined Damon Albarn's band Circus, and Graham Coxon was on guitar, and Dave Rowntree on drums were also members of Circus, and so all of those people became Blur. But first they were changed their name to Seymour when Alex James joined. But in November of '89, Food Records, which was a subsidiary of EMI, A&R rep Andy Ross wanted to sign the band, but the label and him didn't like the name Seymour, so they were like, here's a list of other names you guys can pick, and they decided to pick Blur, and so then Food Records signed the band in March of 1990. Blur has 9 studio albums, and Park Life is their third album. This is the album that really kind of returned them to prominence in Britain and helped define the Britpop scene in the UK. Blur is Britpop, indie rock, alt rock, and while their influences are obvious and many, the Beatles, the Kinks, XTC, David Bowie, Madness, the Specials, the Smiths, the Jam, and Teardrop Explodes, among others. Similar artists: Suede, Oasis, Pulp, Lightning Seeds, and Edwyn Collins. Girls and Boys is the highest ranked single. It reached 59 on the Hot 100. This was a band that was never as big in America as in Britain, based on their sales and the Billboard. And their 2015 album, The Magic Whip, reached 24 on the Billboard 200. Some fun facts about the band: their 1991 debut album, Leisure, reached 7 on the UK charts, but received mixed reviews. And they toured in the US in 1992 afterwards. And after discovering they were £60,000 in debt, and there was a lot of homesickness and infighting within the band during this 2-month tour in the US. And when they returned to the UK, Albarn was upset that Suede had been so successful while they were gone. There's kind of a rivalry between those two bands, I guess specifically with Albarn in particular, and not necessarily the rest of the band. On the verge of being dropped by Food Records, Blur underwent an ideological and image shift, celebrating their English heritage, like many of the bands I referenced as their influences, in contrast to the grunge in America that was popular. And remember, grunge kind of became popular in Britain first before it kind of was sold and exploded in the US. Their second album, Modern Life is Rubbish, was released in December of '92 and reached 15 on the UK charts, but failed to chart in the US. Andy Partridge of XTC was initially brought in on production, but then those sessions were unsatisfactory, and Stephen Street ended up producing this album, and he was the one who brought in with their second single and their first album as producer. Park Life was a huge turnaround for them. In Britain, they debuted at number 1 and stayed on the charts for 90 weeks. And NME called it a great pop record and one of the defining Britpop records. And Albarn told NME in '94 that Park Life is loosely linked concept album about all these stories, and cited the Martin Amis novel London Fields as a major influence. I'm not familiar with London Fields, but I do know Martin Amis, I think, just did the Zone of Interest novel that the movie was based on last year. So that's it. I am not too familiar with Blur other than Song 2, so I am excited to hear your guys' thoughts on this album and Blur as we go along. So let's start with Matt this time. What did you think of this album, Park Life?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Josh, not knowing a whole lot of their catalog, knowing more of their singles. Probably of all like the Britpop bands, obviously Oasis was the big one that hit in the US. I was familiar with them, have a lot of their records, but compared to like Suede or Pulp, I had more familiarity with Blur. So probably the only song I knew on this was Girls and Boys, I think, to be honest. And yeah, man, I like this album. I think I need more time with it though, to really get it, because I this is kind of going back. We kind of covered two records that I felt were very more straightforward in their genre and what they're doing, and then we have two more complicated records with lots of other stuff happening, and this is certainly falling into that latter category. It was more. I was getting more Kinks and like than I was expecting. I mean, that's kind of one of the band that stands out the most as being like, wow, they're kind of like trying to be the '90s versions of the Kinks, right? In terms of just another British band that's kind of a lot of the slice of life, very British kind of sounding album. You know, the accent certainly comes out with Damon Albarn often in this record, I would say. And it's song like, even particularly something like a song like Park Life, which is, you know, like describing this mundane kind of, you know, life that the guy's going through. And I have my tea. It's very British sounding, right? Much in the same way that a lot of the Kink stuff was.
Talking about daily life is a very British thing, I'm finding in the music, in the pop music.
Yeah, and like also the Kinks, not just with themes and like the British soundingness, but also just like the different layers, the melodies, right? Like the a little bit more of the complex arrangements, the throwing at, you know, different kind of things at you, you know, make this for an interesting record. There was a little bit more psychedelia on here, like Far Out reminded me of like early, like Syd Barrett, Pink Floyd, you know, kind of stuff as well. But then you've got something like Clover Over Dover, which is more of a modern sounding song, right? A little bit more of like an alt rock, you know, kind of song. So, it's I wouldn't say it's a long album. It's 52 minutes or 16 tracks. They got a couple instrumentals that are like Josh's favorite, you know, Carnival. I'm not sure why they're in there. It's kind of like they probably you could do without them. They're I don't know. There's one right in the middle and one right at the end of the album, so whatever. But I do like the way that it ends. I think This Is a Low is one of the stronger songs on the record. But I just feel I probably listened to this about 3 times, and I think this is going to be I'm going to like it more the more I would listen to it. I think that there's great melody on here. I think that there's great guitar parts. I think there's great, you know, production and synths. The lyrics at times where I'm picking up on they're interesting, and there's like a tongue-in-cheek nature, you know, kind of with some of the humor that you're getting here. And it's really it's really good. Like I didn't think Blur was as complex as this, like, you know, or just throwing a different sound, because I thought it was gonna be more like an Oasis album, like more like song 2 throughout, or you know, I like Oasis a lot, but Oasis was a much more straight ahead rock band. This is kind of going, this is more, I don't know if I would say it's experimental, but they're definitely delving into other genres, and they're trying different things production wise and instrument wise and stuff. So songs don't sound exactly the same. You know, you're getting variety here. So I really did appreciate that. I just feel like to really get into this, I just want to listen to it more. But it's stronger than I thought it was going to be honest. And I really enjoyed it. And thumbs up. I want to listen to it some more.
I think Blur kind of evolves too as they go on with their album sounds and things, from what I've read so far. But
yeah, I'm with you guys. Blur and Suede were the two I wasn't as familiar with. Of the Britpop bands, I was very obviously familiar with Oasis, Elastica, which I think featured Damon Albarn's girlfriend, right? Justine Frischmann in it.
Yep.
Obviously familiar with that. Supergrass I was familiar with. Pulp had gotten into my world, you know, like, so there was like a lot of those bands. And then later ones like Travis and stuff like that were groups I was familiar with. But Blur was I always felt like Blur belonged to the British, right? Like it was like just, there was something like very British about Blur. Like even when they were positioned here, it was sort of like, oh, well, like Oasis is the American, you know, like the group that broke America, and Blur like just kind of stayed in England and there for like English people. And even though I don't know how to describe it, even though Oasis sounds plenty British, they also sort of sounded right in the American Rubicon in a way that I don't think this would have. Like in
well, there's some like electric guitar based, I feel like, too.
Yes.
Oasis, like traditionally structured kind of songs.
Right, and there was just sort of a like expansiveness to them that fit well in the American market that like is not what Blur clearly was. So I wasn't super, like everybody. I know Girls and Boys. I know Song 2, the stuff that breaks through. I knew a little bit, but so I was actually interested to hear this. Listen, I'm with you, Matt. Like, I was not expecting anywhere near as complex an album as I got right here. I was expecting either like a little bit of like what Oasis sounded like, but more serious, or like what Suede sounded like, with like a glammy feel. And it isn't really either of those. But what it is it's really freaking good. And the beginning of the album, the first 8 songs, how I would describe it is take a tour through very British music that Coming the Stacks has listened to from about the beginning of this to now. Because it's like, oh, there's some Madness. Oh, that sounds like the Jam. Yeah. Of course, the Kinks are here, and even a little bit of the Beatles. You want some XTC? Yes. You want some synth rock? Sure. Slice of life stuff like Squeeze and stuff? Yes, it's all here for it. Like, so each song, it was almost like a tribute to like the most British music ever, right? You know what I mean? I'm like writing it down and I'm almost laughing. I'm like, I at one point I wrote down like, what are like the 8 to 10 bands we covered that are the most British, right? Like that we covered. So it's like the Kinks, the Beatles at times, XTC, Madness, the Specials, the Jam, like. Squeeze, Prefab Sprout, like it's all these, and they're all there, at the beginning. And so I was enjoying it, but it's like, yes, this is a British person's British band, right? And I admired the ambition of it, but I wouldn't say if it was just those 8 songs, I would have like elevated it to like a clear, I love this. It would have been a curiosity. Then to the end comes, and it's almost like halftime of the album, where it's different than the first 8 songs, and it's its own thing, right? It's not as much like homage or, loving retrospective of. And it doesn't really sound like anything else on the album, I'd say. And then from like song 10 to 15, it becomes like super eternal jamma, like one after another. Like London Loves is this great bouncy song with this massive hook. Trouble in the Message Center is an excellent song. Clover Over Dover, like Matt said, sounds like kind of like a modern song. Magic America is this like fantastical sort of cynical song about like I can definitely tell, and I think I did a little cheat just out of curiosity of what this album's about, and I'm like, this seems like a British reaction to like America coming to them and telling them how to be, right? Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a big theme on this album, and it's Magic America is definitely the song where that comes through the most. But then, Jubilee is this really cool like indie rock song, and then like Matt said, This Is a Low is another great song, and it just comes out of nowhere at the end, and it's a longer version of a song than they normally do. And that run from like song 10 to 15 is fantastic, and like I immediately on listen 1 connected with that, and like the upbeatness and the melody and big choruses and fun guitar parts, and just the musicality really stood out. Lot 105, I'm not still quite 100% sure what that is. It's, Josh's carnival, barking sounds like in there and stuff. I could have done without the carnival. So this to me is like 2 different albums, and it really is. Actually, let me also, Girls and Boys is its own thing too, kind of.
It's really like disco dancey.
It sounds like the future of British music as opposed to the past, so like if Girls and Boys is like presaging the future of British dance music, it could be, it's sort of similar to something like and I don't think they were British, but oh my gosh, why am I forgetting what it was? It was a group we covered in the 80s. It was like sort of dance, ABC, the group, if you remember. It has a little bit of that feel to it, which I really like. I don't know if they're British or not. If it is, it fits in the homage lane. Yeah, they are. So there you go. So it's another homage to another British sound, right? But it also sounds of the future. It also gives you a little bit of the feel of the type of stuff that he's going to do in like Gorillaz and stuff like that along the way. It hasn't quite gotten into hip hop or like the trip hop elements that it could be at sometimes, but you could see his comfortability with electric music, right? That's in there as well. So I think with all of that together and like all it was trying to do, it's this big ambitious album, and I'm here for it. I enjoyed the ambitiousness of it. I enjoyed the scope of it. And Matt, I'm with you. I was not expecting. I think Britpop is used pejoratively sometimes, but I think it's a little bit limiting on this album because I think there's a lot more to it. And it's also very easy to draw right connections to the Kinks, but I think it's too minimalizing because in some ways the Britishness of it, the slice of life, the fact they're genre shifting and stuff along the way and taking chances is all like the Kinks, but this is also something different. You know what I mean? There's a little bit more modern sensibility, and certainly, you know, the Kinks aren't going to be comfortable with like electronic music in the way that this is. So yeah, comfortable thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I'm going to mimic everything you guys were saying. I was a huge fan of this album, especially not knowing what to expect. I do think it's an album that's a grower, and I appreciate it. And I don't think I would have appreciated it as much had we not gone through all of those other British bands and albums. That really kind of gave me a firm foundation as to what this band was about. I think the main thing that you guys didn't mention is that Damon Albarn's a really good writer and writes really great hooks. And like that is like kind of the essence of what I respond to in pop music. And that's all over the place. In this album, Girls and Boys obviously is kind of a standout track, but like Tracy Jacks, I found myself singing along to that. End of the Century, Magic America's chorus is fantastic. I know where the Arctic Monkeys come from with Bank Holiday. That sounds like an Arctic Monkeys song. It's like they listened to this when they were kids, or you know, because they were like 18 or whatever in the 2000s or something. But you know, even like Jubilee, which is like intentionally sounding like glam era David Bowie, like that could be a David Bowie song, I feel like. So,
or T-Rex.
Yeah, yep, exactly. They're wearing their influences on their sleeve, but I really like John said, I'm here for it, and I really like this just light you know, Arthur and the Decline of the British Empire title Kinks album. That's kind of like what this loose album is, or loose concept album is what I was trying to say. And I just enjoy the sense of humor. It is different than Suede too. So we're seeing these different facets of Britpop, or what kind of like the British are responding to or like in their music that then translates or doesn't translate over in America. You know, we've still got Pulp and Oasis to come, but they are kind of doing different things. You know, I assume Pulp is doing something different from these other three bands as well.
Yes,
and
I'm more familiar with them.
Yeah, so we kind of get all these different facets of Britpop, which I really like. I really like the complexity of the arrangements and music. We've got the return of the Moog synthesizer, which I really liked. And
yes, we do.
The Hammond organ is back. The melodica, which is like that keyboard instrument you blow into, that was on here. I really, picking out all those different things was really fun.
I was disappointed there was no electric jug, personally.
Well, that was a rare instrument to begin with. So, but yeah,
it's sometimes rare isn't good.
Yeah, it got me excited for what's to come with Blur. I think we covered them a couple more times in the 90s. I saw a couple more albums. So this one, the more I listened to it, it was a good like sunny day weather album as well. I enjoyed listening to it outside when I did. So this is a strong album. Thumbs up for me. I like Blur now. So
there you go.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much fun to like cover albums that if we didn't do this, you're aware of, but you're just like, I've always known Park Life for Blur is well regarded and Grace by Jeff Buckley is well regarded, but I just never got around to either of them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And, it's fun when you listen to these albums and you're like, oh yeah, these are really good. Like, I don't know why I didn't listen to these. These are very, very good. There's also times where we listen to ones and I'm like, I don't know as much about that. But that's half the fun. It's like digging into like a grab, or I compare it to like digging into a bag of Halloween candy, right? Like you get stuff and you're like, will I like this or not? And I love adding the context. I think we all, to some degree, have elements of liking to contextualize stuff, and this has been so much fun. So fun week from that side.
And it's nice to be surprised too, right? Because you go through life all these years. I've known about Blur for decades, right? Essentially, and like. And you think I just have like an idea in my head of what it is, and then you actually listen to it, and you go, "Oh, okay." Like it just in one listen, like in 40, 50 minutes or whatever, you now have a totally different perspective, and it's cool to just keep learning and discovering stuff that you thought you knew about, but you really didn't.
Well, and I like Oasis a fair amount. But I'm starting to think, like, was Oasis the shitty Brit rock band that, like, they gave us, like, fast food, you know what I mean? And, like, Suede and Pulp and Blur were the real deal. Because, like, I know Pulp, and I really like them. And this album was great by Blur, and that Suede album kicked ass, too.
I don't know if I would go that far, but they're definitely more palatable to a large American market.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that not that I'm like, oh, Oasis isn't as good as I thought that they were, because I still really like them, but it just makes sense when you hear these records. You go, well, that's why Blur wasn't big in America, right. And that's why Oasis was. It's just like they're still Britpop. They fall under that umbrella, but what they were doing was pretty different, though. And to hit the American market, like a Wonderwall or a Don't Look Back in Anger. Is going to go a heck of a lot farther here in the States than.
Well, it helps when you write a Beatles song and call it your own song. So that does.
That helps too. That helps too.
At least Blur is they're referencing stuff that we can reference. Yes, they're referencing stuff that we could be like, oh, that's kind of like a Kinks song, but they're not doing a direct rewrite of it. They're basically doing their own spin on it. It's like, oh, that's Kinks light, like as opposed to, oh, that's a Beatles song that we're just going to sing over. So
yeah.
So.